This is Sarah from Dragon Con Theater and Performing Arts. We are a Dragon Con fan base group, and today we are here to talk about theater and how it's also stand up and magic and not just musicals. Um, Joining me today is John and Primetime Steve. If you guys could introduce yourselves. John, can you go first?
So you mean as when you say introduction, like just give my just talk about myself in a very selfish and
Yeah.
egotistical way?
Yep,
Perfect.
yep, yep,
Right in my
basically.
wheelhouse. Happy to do it. My name is Jon Armstrong. So it says right down there, and I am a full-time professional magician and have been my entire life. Being a magician, I'm not only just a magic performer, where I do perform. Currently, I'm the headliner on Disney Cruise Line, but I've performed all over the world and been on TV, The Today Show, The Tonight Show, Peter Penn Teller's Fool Us, Masters of Illusion, all different random shows, plus like doing interesting, weird cameos. I was in an episode of Lucifer, where
Oh,
Lucifer
wow.
actually says, "Hey, that's Jon Armstrong. He's one of the greatest card magicians that's ever lived." Literally, you can look that up. You can see that. I've done other weird, random things in my career, like being the magic consultant on things like Arrested Development and crazy, ridiculous stuff like that. Because besides being a performer, I'm also a magic illusion designer, consultant, and creator. So I invent magics that's being done sometimes by actors, sometimes on stage where they're actually having to perform as whatever particular magic character. There's a lot of magic in Pippin, for example. I've done many productions of Pippin over the years, creating magic stuff for those guys to be able to do. And then I work on, again, like I said, stuff that becomes like more permanent, like theme park attractions that also have live performance elements to them. So lots of Disney stuff. I've worked on Disney and Universal stuff over the years, and that's it. That's kind of what I do.
Awesome.
I'm
Okay.
Primetime
How
Steve,
about
and
you,
I'm
Steve?
just a funny guy. Yep, that's it.
We're stand up.
No,
That to me is like that's godlike ability just to stay on stage without props. You know what I mean? Like
I've been doing stand up now for probably about 15 years, and I was a theater performer from way back, and I did theater in high school. I did theater professionally right out of high school and in between college. And what I found is that there are so many different kinds of ways that you can express yourself through performance. And stand up just happened to be something that I fell into on a dare. My friend and I decided we were going to produce some improv or stand up and improvisational shows around Atlanta back in the early 2000s. And our first show, my friend just leaned over to me and she says, "So I dare you to get up there and do that one day." And I said, "You have to tell me because I'll get up and do it right now." And she goes, "Well, go ahead and prove it." And I did, and I was horrible. I got no laughs at all. But one of the comedians did come up to me afterwards and they said, you have potential. And if you'll allow me to help you kind of dig and learn how to write your material, we can find the right voice for you. And they did, and I did, and I haven't looked back, and it's been a crazy, fantastic ride ever since. So thanks for having me.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate that. Now, our first question is what inspired you to start doing things, your profession in this case? Like, was it a specific performer, or was it just that you fell in love with it? How did you start doing what you're doing?
I guess we're just doing this in order, Mr. T, Mr.
For
Primetime
right now,
Steve.
for
I'll
right
just,
now.
I don't know, like just take a minute.
Yeah,
But
John, go ahead.
I grew up in Orlando, Florida, cultural center of the world, land of opportunity if you're a roller coaster. And I grew up around theme parks, seeing performers in theme parks, going on rides like the Haunted Mansion and thinking, wait a minute, why are those ghosts following me? How is that still looking at me? Why is that working? And so I become not only fascinated by how illusions in general worked, but also by performers who were doing in complex sleight of hand right before my face. And so those two worlds became sort of intertwined to me. And I, again, was very lucky. Much like Steve was talking about, I got a mentor. He was a performer at Walt Disney World, did his show there. I saw him and said, I want to do that for the rest of my life. And I was lucky enough that he took me under his wing, and that's it, basically, how I started into it.
Definitely. Now, Steve, you said you started on a dare.
Yeah. So I mean, I've always been a stage person. I've always loved being on stage. I like the instant gratification of a live audience. I've always enjoyed that. As much as I enjoy working on film sets and TV and things like that, because I like the challenge of getting those little intricate details right, because I do enjoy that as well. But I like the instant gratification. I like being able to perform and have an audience kind of applaud right there, or laugh right there. And especially when it's your own material. When you're writing stuff for yourself and you're performing for yourself, you're kind of it's a vulnerability that you don't necessarily find in a lot of other mediums, because you can hide behind other people's material, can hide behind other people's characters. My stage character, Primetime Steve, is a character that I created personally. That's the character that when I get out on stage, that's what people see. It's still a character. That's why I find that stand up and things like magic performances, things like that, we perform a character on stage. It's not who we are necessarily in real life, so to speak. We do put on some sort of a persona, but there is a little bit more of us in that character than you might find in somebody that's just doing a performance of Phantom. We're putting a lot more of ourselves into that, because we're the sole person on that stage, trying to hold that audience. I had a mentor that just really kind of helped me find my voice, and the voice that I found I really enjoy. Audiences seem to enjoy it. So, I've been doing it ever since. And, well, not so much since COVID. COVID kind of shut things down for a little while, and then my daughter was born, and so I'm slowly getting back into doing it again full time. So
definitely,
I just moved up to Tennessee, and I'm getting my goal is to open up a comedy club up here in Eastern Tennessee, because we have none.
Oh.
Sure. Awesome. Well,
to piggyback on what you were saying, it's funny. Like I talk a lot because I work on other people's acts. I direct and I consult on other acts, and I always talk about character work when it comes to being a persona on stage, as either a small C character or a big C character. And I think in our professions, there's both. There is personas, small C characters, where we've taken, and that's how I perform. It sounds like how you perform, Steve. Where we've taken aspects of ourselves and exaggerated them slightly in some direction,
for sure,
to put ourselves much more bare on stage, which is very rare for magic, to be honest, because most magicians, again, are very much hiding behind props. And then there's people who are what I call big C characters, and that happens in comedy as it does in magic, where it's someone who, if they come off stage, they're a completely different person. Sure. Emo Phillips is a good example of that in comedy, or Pee Wee Herman, so on and so forth, where the act was an act where they were creating an entire persona up all the way through, and then that was not really who they were at all. And I think that's interesting, especially when you're talking about performance and how people approach acting, and thinking that there's not a lot of acting involved in what we do. There's tons of acting involved. It just depends on where we're stretching ourselves and what we're putting into it. And I'm sure you would agree.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into our next question, actually, which is what makes your performance type part of like the theater overall, and how do you embrace, I guess, the performance part of your craft, as you might say? So Steve, why don't you go first?
Sure. I guess some of the stuff that I say on stage I wouldn't necessarily say in real life to just anybody on the street. You understand what I'm saying? So
Sure.
that to me is where the performance starts. Is the
Mhm.
fact that I'm free enough in that position because I'm on the stage and under the lights. You really can't see an audience so much, and you kind of just feel free to say whatever you want to say. And in
Definitely.
comedy, um, having a voice to be able just to talk about stuff that people will. And again, I try not to be the comic who's divisive. I try
Mhm.
not to split my audiences. I don't. You know, there are comics that do that and they do it very beautifully, and they can talk about politics and religion and things like that, and
Mhm.
um, do it in a way that is fun
Fun.
and funny for everybody.
Mhm.
I'm not one of those. I would get too passionate about it. So I
Mhm.
try to not bring that stuff into because I have to know where my limits are. But what
Sure.
makes what I do theater is the fact that it's not something that, just like in real life, I'm not going to run down the street and if something good happens, I'm not going to sing a song and break in a song with a chorus behind me and birds are not going to land on my shoulder and things are not going to happen like that in real life. So what I do on stage becomes a performance because I'm saying things that I wouldn't say and do on the street.
Awesome.
Um, I feel more free to do that because again, I am exaggerating the person that I am, and therefore
Sure.
I'm creating a character, and that character can feel free to talk about that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Like if you work with somebody like Andrew Dice Clay, you
Mhm.
know, you think about the persona that you see on stage,
Sure. Yeah.
and
No,
he is a
definitely.
larger than life character on stage,
Quite
and then
literally. Yeah. Yeah. No. Like.
and then when you get to know him off stage, he's not
Really.
he's not quite that. He's still a big person. He's still he's
Mhm.
still quite a character. But the things that he says on stage, he wouldn't go off and just stay half cocked off stage. He
Sure.
wouldn't do that.
Sure. Now, do you typically like? I know a thing with stand-up comedy specifically is you always think of like their bits and their sets and stuff like that. So do you plan out what you're gonna talk about, or do you kind of feel what the audience is doing in your performance?
I'll say yes to both of those things.
Hmm.
I have a set list that
Okay.
like just like a musician is going to have a set list that they are, they have an A and they're going to end with a Z. That's what my set list does for me. It just kind of gives me a guideline of things so
Hmm.
that if I find myself exhausting something on stage, because I can take something and if it runs with the audience, then I'll just run with that for as long as it'll run.
Sure.
But if I find that it starts to exhaust, then my set list kind of brings me back to, okay, you can transition into this, this, and this, and this. If there's good crowd work going, I can run crowd work for a whole set.
Awesome.
But it sometimes it doesn't pan out that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so it just depends upon the moment.
Hmm.
My set list will guide me, but I don't want to limit myself to just doing the jokes that I've written beforehand, the pieces that I've written beforehand.
That
Those
makes
are my
sense.
guidelines to finding out where the audience sits
Hmm.
and what they're feeling. Because if they're feeling something that I don't have on my set list, I'm going to go off in a different direction. If that makes any sense.
Definitely does. Um, and how about you, John? Like your performance type, I mean, obviously, typically we think of magicians, and as you were talking about, like they're kind of like hidden behind their props and their tricks and stuff like that. Um, how do you make your performance type part of the theater, like an extension of you in addition to what
Well,
you're doing on stage?
I think in my case, most stand up comedy, not to constantly just sort of like do a comparing contrast to stand up to magic, but most stand up comedy is essentially sat audience with stand up on mic talking to crowd. That's pretty much how that goes.
Hmm.
Magic. can be very much more environmental. So when it comes to more immersive entertainment, you have close-up performers who would go up and approach groups, bring them to a location, do something for them special and magical, and then set them off, much like in sort of a Sleep No More type of sense, where you would have more spontaneity, street shows where a group is gathered and something really amazing happens for that group, and then they go away. And you could do stuff like that. So everything from the extremely small and intimate to the huge things that can fill stadiums, like the old David Copperfield shows where he would produce, train cars and airplanes and things like that, which are over the top gigantic, right? And not that there's a lot of different performances that you'd still be able to just do a stand on a mic and perform for Shea Stadium. I mean, we've seen all those concert specials where they can do that, singing or whatever talent it is, stand up, whatever it is. But magic has a tendency, because of the prop, you have to have the larger aspect to the prop. So we can have all different sizes and shapes to what's going on as far as the performance goes. And then how it's related to to theater, or what, I think the crux of what's going on is that most performers of any sort, whether we're going close up all the way to the largest grand illusionist, are doing stuff where we have a plan, we have a definite, dividing things we have to do, because again, we have to achieve the effect and make sure the effect actually works. But the good ones, and this is not everybody, but the good ones can veer off those paths, knowing what's going on, and be able to work, say, like what's in keeping things in the moment to the crowd and how the crowd is responding to whatever's going on. Also, if the trick screws up, we have to respond to that and be able to make it work so that it's a successful conclusion happens. Maybe not the conclusion that was the planned conclusion, but a successful conclusion at least. And so you have this other factor that's going on where essentially you're juggling both the audience's reaction, what they're doing with the prop and what the prop is doing, and or your own skill level or whatever. So there's a lot of that going on. And I personally, I perform as a comedic, like sleight of hand, stand-up performer. So my current performing is much more in the line of like a straight stand-up comic than, say, like a grand illusionist who's going to dance with girls and put them in boxes and cut up and like that, right? That's not what I really do. But I love that stuff. I actually think that stuff's actually quite amazing when you get down to it. I think what makes this slightly different, but in the same sort of family as any kind of performance, because I'm the believer. There's a great book by Scott McCloud called Understanding Comics. And Understanding Comics is like a Bible to me. I tell every magician student that I have, they have to read it, and and I say, take out the word comics and put in magic, or put in stand-up, or put in juggling, or put in whatever, and you'll probably get some of the best philosophy on that type of what's going on there. Definitely. And he defines art as anything that is done in a creative way that is not trying to get us either fed, sheltered, or or in some way like procreation. Like essentially anything that's not about our survival instincts. If we're doing it in a creative manner, that's art. Like, and his example is like if you're running away from like a gigantic tiger, and then you climb onto the tree. You see a tree. You wait. I need to get on the tree. You get up to the tree. The tiger goes past, but as soon as the tiger goes past, you go na 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 na. That's the third part. The na 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 is the art, and I believe that. So there is art in all of this, and the only thing that makes us stay alive, the thing that's going to keep us around, even though we have this amazing machine that we're currently on, where people can watch stuff happen, for sure, is that we could give them something that they can't do any other way, which is a personal happening and moment that feels unique and genuine and actually impossible to have done in an interactive manner outside of being in a live performance setting.
Mm-hmm.
So when an audience is ignored, when performers just basically like ignore whatever's happening in the crowd and just go on with whatever they're saying, the audiences realize that they're being spoken at and not being conversed with, and then they shut down, or they go even harder on that stuff, and that's when you see bad acts and so on and so forth get the boot. And so yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm constantly trying to live in the moment. But always provide that solid backbone, because if I come out without any backbone at all, then I'm lost, right?
Definitely.
You have to have something there that you can veer off of.
Sure. No, that definitely makes sense. And you'll have to send me that book name, because I'm now very interested in reading that for
Understanding
sure.
Comics by Scott McCloud. It's
Scott
a very
McCloud.
important book.
Okay.
It's a great book.
Definitely.
It's a great book.
I'll have to take a look at that for sure. Now, my next question is, one thing that us as a group at Dragon Con has always struggled against is whether or not theater or performance is a part of pop culture. Okay. And spoiler alert, I feel like performance is a part of pop culture. It's something that it's just so integrated in the things that we watch and the things that we do. Whether that be somebody like David Copperfield, as you said, and like that name, or Houdini, or Jerry Seinfeld. Okay, all of these are great parts of our pop culture experience. And I mean, we have things like Saturday Night Live and stuff like that for comedy, and those are huge parts even of the Dragon Con convention itself. So my question for you is, do you feel like theater is part of pop culture, or do you feel like it's just something kind of separate? And John, why don't you go first?
Yes. Next question. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, of course. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, look, I think anything. What we have to define pop culture, right? So if we say pop culture, it's part of the culture, it's part of our history. We make it, it makes it pop. Okay, that's interesting way of looking at it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, whatever the definition of pop culture is, if we could say that, like, it is the type of stuff that is happening in media that we are talking about and becoming fans of, well, then yeah, that, of course. I mean, from every single stand-up special to people who wear slogans of different comedians as lines on their shirts, to people who on TikTok would do imitations, like kids doing imitations of people putting sheets over people and making them pretend like they disappear. That is obviously part of the conversation of what's going on. And when then and the easiest way to tell is that so much of stand-up, improv, magic, juggling, mime, any sort of these, like, I guess, auxiliary arts to performance in general, are all parodied. Every single one of their parodies, parody movies about magic, parody movies about theme park performers, just parody movies about and so obviously you have to have enough of a knowledge of these things to understand how to make fun of those things. So thus, they're probably most likely part of the pop culture conversation. And it's different than, like, you don't find a lot of, like, David Copperfield fan groups who dress up in cosplay and walk around conventions like they do in Star Wars, right?
Right.
But at the same time, there are definitely people who are big fans of X performer in whatever discipline it might be, who are going to go to those shows, see those things, want to be part of that community of other people who are also big fans of that person or what they do or that group or whatever. And then that's the same things. I mean, like, they're all fans, right? I mean, I think that's what this is. And if we're going to go back to sort of, like, even further, then Broadway, all the people who wear the Hamilton t-shirts, all the people who, are setting out lines about, different things, who are debating online who played this role better in this which particular performance. Well, what is more geeky and pop culture based than people arguing over people's interpretations of art, right? I mean, that's what
Mm-hmm.
we all end up doing, like that.
Definitely.
So I think absolutely it has to be. I'm also a believer, that even fans, any fan is a fan, and pop culture, and that part, because they're fans of something related to pop culture. Sports fans are still, are
Mm-hmm.
fans. The whole point is anything that like
That's
rallies
right.
people together so that they are actually engaged in this particular activity, then they want to gather with other people who are also fans of that particular activity. Well, that's obviously the pop culture.
Definitely.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm going to piggyback on what John just said because he mentioned sports. And I think that's such an interesting way to look at it. I think that anything that is water cooler discussion driven
Mm-hmm.
can be considered pop culture.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because anything that people see the night before and then come together at work the next day and discuss,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a part of pop culture. Did you see that stand up special on Netflix? Did you see that so and so is making a comeback? Do you see that Penn and Teller have got a new show? Do you see that
Definitely.
this, that, and the other? And it's all about, even, and I hate to say it, even like the things like um, the Kardashians and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
because people discuss those as hokey as that sounds. It's all a part of the pop culture. It's all a part of
For sure.
what people are talking about the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what defines pop culture. So, sure, like Jerry Seinfeld, Robin Williams,
Yeah.
those kind of guys that really have found a level of success to be in front of millions of people at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're the ones that are being talked about the next day.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same token, the office staff that came to see me do my show and were part of about 150 people at the club, they come back to the office the next day and they're telling my jokes the next day and they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
recreate those bits that I did on stage. So it very much makes what I do a part of relevant pop culture. And
Definitely.
as far as theater is concerned, theater is one of those, and we're talking about so many different aspects of theater. But if you just want to look at theater as theater, anything that's done live performance wise is going to have an instant impact on people,
Mm-hmm.
because
Definitely.
there is a difference to me in seeing something done right in front of me live, be it a musical performance, be it when I was in New York several years ago and just happened to go and see a live performance of In Here at the Wind, and had Christopher Plummer and
Oh, wow.
oh shoot, what's the big guy from Cocoon?
Oh,
Richard Dinley?
No, who he was the alien. It's
Oh.
um
I'm terrible with names.
again, he just passed away not too long ago. It was a couple of years ago
Okay.
he passed away. But the two of them were playing the opposing lawyers
Mm-hmm.
on stage, and it just happened to be one of those performances, one of those Broadway performances that was in a smaller theater.
Mm-hmm.
It was in an older theater. It was a straight play. It was not a musical.
Mm-hmm.
And to see, and they wound up upgrading our tickets and putting us on stage. So we were sitting in the jury box on stage.
Oh, wow.
So I was less than 10 feet away from Christopher Plummer while
Mm-hmm.
he's giving this great big courtroom summation. And
Definitely.
it was such an impactful thing to see. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely one of those, if you see it live in front of you, it has more of an impact, I think, than if you see it on television.
Sure. No,
So,
definitely.
I think that even makes us more kind of an immediate impact on the pop culture scene, because when
Definitely.
people see it live, they're like, "Wow, that was right there in front of me."
No, and I completely agree. And yes, you're not gonna see a lot of like cosplays and stuff like that of that, but I'm gonna point out I always see a David S. Pumpkins cosplay at least once at Dragon
For sure.
Con. So,
Sure.
those things, comedy, and that's not exactly stand up, but it is part of the performance realm, in my opinion. And that's why things like Saturday Night Live are live. Because as you were just talking about, there is something completely different about seeing something live. It's an immediate impact on what you're doing, and that's actually another panel I would love to do at some point, is the importance of live theater and live performance, because I think it's so important, and it influences people and how they interact on their day-to-day life. And so I definitely totally agree with you on that. Now, um, I guess one thing that you talked about, John, how you've been doing it since literally you were a kid, right?
Yeah.
But if somebody in, like, say in our group, who's an adult, or they have a teenager or something like that, wants to start getting involved in magic, how would you recommend them start doing that? Like,
Sure. Oh, and I just wanted to say real quick, on the last subject,
sure.
don't you think theater was the original pop culture? I mean, pre-media, like
Hmm.
people went out and saw shows. Shows were being performed, and that's what people talked about and were fans of. Were performers in that medium before there
Hmm.
was, radio, before there was television, before there was
That's
the
right.
film. And so all of the, this is the original pop culture. This is film and live performance in theater is the original pop culture. Period. Anyway,
Yeah,
moving. So I
feel
on
free.
at Dragon Con, I do a workshop. I'll give just a straight up plug, and then I'll talk about some general things. At Dragon Con, myself, and my buddy Kurt Anderson, we do a 2-day magic workshop during the con,
Hmm.
where you can come
Awesome.
in. You have to have zero knowledge of magic whatsoever. Come
Hmm.
in, and by the end of the 2 days, where you're walk out being able to perform some really cool stuff that you'll be able to impress your friends with, use it for breaking up conversations, meeting people at the con, having a good time, impressing your friends, bosses, relatives, families at Thanksgiving, whatever. Some really fun stuff to be able to do. We offer a very beginner workshop, as well as an advanced workshop for those who've done some magic in the past or want to work on some new stuff. We do that as part of the Skeptic Track in
Hmm.
at Comic Con. I mean, sorry, at Dragon Con. And
You just that's a big no-no at Dragon Con, calling us
well,
Comic
I
Con.
don't tell anybody, but I do stuff at both. And so anyway, but if you were just like today, you're like, I'm interested in magic. I have kids interested in magic. I have some friends who are interested in magic. What can they do? And what you would do essentially is you can go to a library. And there's some great books on magic in the library. There's
Hmm.
also really, really, if you want, if there are young kids, the book that I'd recommend is a book called Big Magic for Small Hands.
Hmm.
It's by a guy named Joshua Jay, a buddy of mine, who basically realized that there was a little kids want to do magic, but they can't always do the stuff that's written in the classic text, and wrote a very, very good children's magic book about learning how to do magic, but it includes online tutorials so you can see it being done and then read the book and understand how it works. So it's a really, really cool way of doing that. If they're kids, if someone is older, just wants to get into magic in general, there's tutorials on YouTube, things like that. Some of those I'd watch out for, because some of them are basically the blind leading the blind. They're not really knowing what they're talking about. They're just looking for the views and the clicks. But there are some good resources out there. But again, Magic Library, the books that I recommend if you're really interested in card magic is Card College, Mark Wilson's Complete Course in Magic, Josh Jay's Complete Course in Magic. There's a few other different ones that are more modern texts that help you out, and have video components online where you can actually see what's being done and helps you learn whatever it is you want to do. There you go.
How about you, Steve? How do you recommend people start getting started with stand up? I can't talk.
Well, I think that if people are really serious about wanting to get started with doing stand up comedy, there are in a lot of places there are classes that you can take
Hmm.
where a professional comedian will start you with your knowledge of stage presence, your knowledge of owning and commanding a stage.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's all down to really the material and your timing.
Hmm.
Um, because everybody thinks that they're funny if
Mhm.
they can get people to laugh at their office or at their job or wherever they are. Oh, I can make my family laugh. Well, okay, that's great. There's a difference
Mhm.
in what we do, and that is the fact that there is a timing element
Mhm.
that you have to be a good storyteller, but you can learn those things. Those things can be taught. So I would recommend finding out whatever city you're in, whatever location you're in, finding out if there's a class. If there's not a class that you can find that's available, go to a local open mic night, or
Mhm.
find one of the professional comedy clubs in the area and just go to one of the performances. Talk to one of the performers that is like a mid-level performer, either an opener or a feature act,
Mhm.
and talk to them about how they got their start. Sometimes people are willing to mentor. Like I had
Mhm.
a very good mentor into the comedy world,
Mhm.
and I'll shout out the fact that my mentor's name is Evan Fowler. He is fantastic,
Mhm.
and he's probably one of the funniest people I know. And I look up to him and think, one day I can aspire to be as funny as he is, just naturally a funny guy.
Mhm.
But the main thing that he taught me how to um, not only own the stage, but have everything spaced out and timed in a specific way. Um, I don't know. It's such a weird medium to perform in because a lot of people think they can tell jokes well, and
Mhm.
it they can't. Uh, um, it's and I don't want to discourage anybody from trying an open mic night. I see what the Facebook user said. Um, I want you guys to understand. Getting up and trying it, you might discover that you have natural talents that you had
Mhm.
no idea were there. I never
Yep.
thought that I could do stand up. I didn't. I thought that I would just get up there and it would just be fun to do, and I wouldn't be any good at it.
Mhm.
Um, and I found out that I had potential, and it was something inside of me that was already there,
Mhm.
um, to learn. But learning that timing, learning that how to write material that's
Mhm.
relevant and is going to speak to an audience, and allow an audience to engage back
Mhm.
with that conversation, keeping relevant with the times. I think those are all important factors. So, but just find out if there's a class or if somebody's willing to take you under their wing, and
Mhm.
then start from there. And I'm in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. If anybody's in Knoxville, Tennessee,
Mhm.
and is interested in doing comedy and wants to start learning, I'm available to help.
Awesome.
So you can
Definitely.
look. My last name is actually Denham, so you can look me up. I'm Steve Denham. I live in South Knoxville, so come find
Definitely.
me, and I'm happy to help you.
Yeah. Now, I guess one of the things, we've talked about like how getting started and kind of the struggles and getting started and stuff like that. But what are some of the struggles that you guys experience professionally? Like something that like people may not think of. Is it things like booking a gig or trying to find somebody to say, well, you're not David Copperfield, so why should we give you prime airtime or prime stage time? What are some of the things that you might experience? And uh, John, why don't you go first?
The concerns are just for any performer. I mean, there's being on the road a lot.
Mhm.
My main thing, like I was being on Disney Cruise Line, so I'm basically gone away from my family. I have a 2 year old and whatnot, and that's tough being away. But
Mhm.
it's how the bills are paid, right? So you have to do it.
Mhm.
So that's no fun. There is the just I'm lucky enough that I've always been able to get the next thing. That
Mhm.
things are always rolling for me. I'm very established here in Los Angeles, where I live, as somebody who does this, consults for things, does these things. It's been very. But when I first moved out here, you're just
Mhm.
trying to get that name, trying to put yourself out there as much as possible, and just like any job that is where it's a look at contractor based, or you're a vendor, or a consultant or whatever, it's ebbs and flows, and you get the high peaks where you're making a lot of money, and then you get the low peaks where you're not making a lot of money, and that's just how it works. And you just have to be able to prepare for all that stuff, and self-employment tax and all the crap that goes along with that, and everything else that, like, because we're, I'm never going to have a health plan. I'm never going to get, have a 401k, and that's all stuff that I'll never be able to have. And you have to, making a living like this is tough. But I've been very fortunate that it's worked out for me.
Yeah. And I would think the reward is you get to do what you love.
Yeah. I mean, it's ultimately pretty amazing that 8-year-old Jon said, I want to do this the rest of my life. And here I am, 47-year-old Jon, and I'm still doing it. And so this is it. I never had an office job, never flipped a single burger, never waited a single table. So, I've been very, very lucky that this is what is able to support me my entire life. And get me wrong, there were some solid ramen days. There were some solid, sleeping on other people's couches and, doing what you could to survive. But I've been very lucky that this is it, and it's been able to sustain me this long.
Definitely. How about you, Steve?
Well, I think that just when you talk about bookings and you talk about people wanting to compare you to other people that have had certain successes, as far as they're getting certain specials and being on TV, and why haven't you been on Last Comic Standing? How come you haven't done that? And, it's all about where you feel like you are in your career. And I've been very fortunate that I'm a good negotiator. I started out having an agent that would book me for stand-up, and I nixed that pretty quickly. Because I can negotiate so much better than my agent. I will not embarrass them. I will not say who they are. But when somebody books you in Buffalo in January and books you in El Paso in August, you have somebody that doesn't understand how maps work and how the equator is a factor during certain times of the year.
Right.
And so I've always been able to negotiate myself into places. However, when it comes to pay scale, things like that, people always try to lowball you, for sure. People always try to make you feel less than what you really are worth. They don't want to pay you what your time is worth, what your travel's worth. If I'm booking a road dog tour that might go for 6 to 10 states, I have to make sure that I'm covering my expenses and I can leave the road with something in my pocket.
For sure.
Because I do have a family to support. Again, this is what I do. Unfortunately for me, Jon, I'm very envious of the life that you've had, because whereas you said there have been solid ramen days and all, I have waited tables and I have had office jobs and taken gigs when I could get gigs, but making sure that I was doing and it's sometimes that cut into opportunities, and so there's a trade-off for some of those things. You can have a little more security, but it's going to cut into your opportunities, and sometimes those opportunities are the ones that lead you to the bigger successes.
Right.
Definitely.
And so those are some of the big pitfalls that I see. So you really have to either be all in, dedicated, or be okay with a modicum amount of success until you get that right opportunity that comes along that fits into your schedule. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, no, it does.
So moving here to Tennessee, I haven't done stand-up in a couple of years solidly. Smattering here and there. I do have an office job here in Tennessee, but I took one specifically so that my nights are free, so that I can start going and performing again. I work with a travel agency, and so they actually encourage me to travel.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
So I'm going to be able to start getting back out on the road and doing what I love to do again, and do it a little more freely because they're encouraging me to do so.
Definitely.
So
Now, I know we've talked about like the last couple of years. It's been brought up a few times. So, you know, w- everything is starting to come back after
mhm.
the pandemic and stuff like that. Now, how when things started opening back up, there was questions about how viable theater was and how viable Broadway was and stuff like that. Do you guys find that the same questions are being applied to what you guys do now? Or uh, because so much of that was brought online during the pandemic because that was the only option. Do you find that that is part of the struggle, or are you finding people are willing to start coming out and starting to book you again and things like that? Um, why don't you answer that, Steve?
Yeah, I feel like as things have opened back up, people have really been hungry for those face to face performances again.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
saw it when Broadway opened back up and theater started happening again up there. Every single one of the shows broadcast or recorded their opening of their show when it
Mm-hmm.
reopened, and how
Mm-hmm.
amazing the support was, the crowds were. Everybody was
Mm-hmm.
so just happy to be there. And I found the same thing, like stand up online when there's no audience to feed off of.
Mm-hmm.
I tried it. It's awful.
Mm-hmm.
It was awful because there was no feedback. There was no way I could engage
Mm-hmm.
with the audience. It might have just been me reading dad jokes, do you know? And that's as fun as that can be sometimes for certain people, and people can pull it off. That's not who I am. I have to have an audience to feedback off of, to engage, because I half of what I do on stage I take from Andy Kaufman. When Andy
Mm-hmm.
Kaufman said, "What is the secret of being funny?" And I
Mm-hmm.
think they even covered that in the movie Man on the Moon. He asked the guru, "What is the secret of being funny?" And he said, "Silence."
Mm-hmm.
And having those long pauses
Mm-hmm.
and moments where the audience, the tension builds before you say the next thing, that's so important, and it doesn't translate online.
Definitely.
Like if there's not a
Definitely.
live audience for me to feed off of, I can't build that tension. I have no idea if people are even looking at me.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make any sense to do that. So I feel like yeah, people are they are hungry for it. People, when you see these venues starting to reopen, there are lines around the block
Mm-hmm.
everywhere for they're just hungry for that live entertainment again.
Definitely. Yeah. How about you, John?
I mean, the pandemic was horrible, but it was tough for anybody in live performance. Period.
Mm-hmm.
And I got very lucky. Again, I guess and myself and a few other of us, we created online shows that were able to do magic in a digital way
Mm-hmm.
using things like StreamYard and Zoom and stuff like that. And
Definitely.
unlike, say, where you're just trying to talk to a void, I have the advantage that I had some other prop and some other interesting things that I was doing, getting them to
Mm-hmm.
interact with me in an interesting way. And so we could do, I would actually say, some really interesting, fun magic that would be impossible to do in any other way.
Mm-hmm.
And I did okay during the pandemic. It was great, and
Right.
and every single time I did one of those shows, I was like, I just can't wait to be back on a real stage in front of real
Mhm.
people. So
Definitely.
I got lucky. The money thing wasn't so bad. I was able to we were able to survive, and we just had our child. It was
Mhm.
we she was born in July of 2020, so right
Oh,
in the heart,
wow.
right?
Yeah, right at the
So
beginning where everything
yeah,
was shut down.
yeah.
Yeah,
My wife was fine with
definitely.
Yeah,
playing
my,
that on a
my,
roll.
my daughter was born in January of 2020.
So
So
there you go. There you
Yeah.
go.
yeah, for sure.
So so we definitely needed something to do, and it worked out. But no, I mean, essentially, I'm not definitely not going to get into COVID politics, but
Well, no.
essentially, from what I can tell, everything is basically back as far as how shows are operated. I'm not saying the numbers of shows are up at the same level as they were before, because it's certainly not. But things are pretty much operating the way things were pre the
Right.
pandemic, and I with vaccines and the medicine you can do with it and so on and so forth, I think we've probably turned the corner on that, which is great. The only thing is, there are just less opportunities. And there were a bunch of us that went in and it was like, we're going to do this and we're going to figure this out. We're going to do this online thing. And they stayed with it. And then they were the first people to be able to hit the ground running when those small little venues started opening back up. And, with the big social distancing. I mean, when I started doing cruises again in October of 21, holy crap. Like 1,000-seat theaters, we could only put 250 people in them. We had to space them all out. Everyone wearing masks. Wasn't allowed to bring anyone on stage. Wasn't allowed to touch anything. All these rules, right? And we all made it work because we were used to doing it in a digital way anyway. But there were so many performers, and I mean, really, really good performers in lots of different disciplines that couldn't adjust to the medium online, and then just sort of gave up, got some other's job, and are still doing that job to this day. So we lost a lot of really amazing, talented people who maybe are now starting to get back into things and whatever. But I know a lot of people who just went, I just sell cars now. Yeah, I still doing magic. I sell cars now, and that's it. That's what they do. And so it was tough. And I think that era, those couple of years will have a huge impact when we look back in the history and any of the art forms, myself, stand-up, juggling, again, name any variety art form. And we're going to look back and say, here's a bunch of greats that we no longer have. Here's people who innovated and did this. Here's, it had a very, very, very strong impact on what things are going to look like moving forward. And definitely didn't make things easier on getting people paid what they're worth. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Now, if any of the audience watching has any questions, now is the time to put them in the comments.
How much of an audience do we have watching? I can't tell.
I know. It keeps going up and down. We have about 4 to 5 people watching us currently, but that can fluctuate. We had up to 8 at one point.
Sweet.
It's a Monday night. What can I say? We get a lot of people watching these after the panel presents. As part of the reason we post them on YouTube. But I guess for me, one of the things, like, I guess specifically with magic, one of the things I remember specifically is going to my local theme park, which eventually ended Des Moines, Iowa. Okay.
I know exactly the magician you saw too. That guy is still there.
Yeah, I very possibly haven't been to Adventureland in forever, but I remember
still there. He's been in there for like 30 years. Man, that guy's been there forever.
Well, I remember his show, and like that's one of my vivid memories from when I was a child, was this guy up on stage, and him and his wife, at one point, I think it was his son, it might have been a nephew or something, was up there. And like, he used to always bring people up on stage. That was a big part of him. And Jon, I've watched some of your videos, and I see you bringing people up on stage. So like, how much does audience participation, like, does that affect what you do and how you plan to do it? Or let's say there's nobody willing to volunteer. How do you overcome that?
Well, I mean, that's wow. I do an entire masterclass on that very question. So, but essentially, the goal is to never let anyone say no, because you're going to give them the opportunity to understand who you are, what you're about, and that they're going to be in good hands before you ever ask that question.
Sure.
So the bad way of doing this is to come on stage and say, "Hi, I'm the magician. I need an audience volunteer. You come up here." Now, that person is going to say no, most likely, and then that gives every other person in the audience the ability to say no. Period. So But instead, I come out, I talk about myself, I do some magic where I don't have to actually have somebody up on stage. They understand my sense of humor, what I'm about. I then do a thing where I go into the crowd and I do some magic where everyone is getting to participate as the entire group, and they can see that that was fine. And so now when I go down to the audience and say, hi, would you come up here and help me out? They're far more interested and able to come up and do that, right? Because it's just it's a whole, and again, I've shortened a gigantic thing that I talk about into a very short, small sound bite, but it's essentially what it is. It's about getting them to know who you are, getting them to be on your side, and then they are going to want to participate more. And magic doesn't have to be like I pick someone on the audience, I come up here, they do something, and I send them back to their seats. I can totally just go into the crowd and say, here, inspect this deck of cards. Here, you look at this knife or whatever. And then now I've already established that I'm going to be nice to them, and I could do so many things. I could engage the entire group as a whole and do magic where, every single person gets to do a thing. And all right, I'm going to say the 4 suits of playing cards, applaud at your favorite suit. And now the whole crowd, the one with the most applause, they get to choose the suit of the card, whatever. The point is that it's not a binary thing. And most of the time, you're able to create something that is going to get them on your side and want them wanting to do what you're asking them to do. And, it's just about respecting your audience, making sure that you're not treating them in a negative way, making sure that you're not making them feel like they're a prop or they're being put in position. That's all. It's pretty simple, basic manners.
Okay, definitely. How about you, Steve? I mean, I'm assuming with stand up, you don't bring people up on stage very much. But how do you overcome, like, maybe an audience isn't feeling your joke, or you're not getting the laughs? How do you overcome that?
Well, like I said, I can pretty much tell in the first couple minutes which way the audience is going to lean material wise. And I can tell that by just kind of getting my little warm up going out there. I call the first 5 minutes of what I do just my personal warm up, getting a feel for the audience, finding out where they are in the night, how much they've had to drink. It depends on if it's the early show, if it's the late show, if it's a Sunday show, whatever it is. But I find that doing some crowd work too will help to kind of relax the audience, because then they have a place to focus their attention on the person that I picked out of the audience. It's a little different than what John's nice to the people. I'm not necessarily that way. I'm not ever cruel or mean, but I might pick out somebody that, if I tell a joke and it doesn't hit right away, I might pick out somebody in the audience and say, if you'd like, I can explain to you why that's funny. And because I'm going to start going fast here, so I'm going to need you to stay with me, okay? And as long as I'm focusing on that person, now everybody else feels free to laugh, and they feel free to enjoy them, especially the people that are sitting at the table with said person. Now they're really engaged, and they're really wanting for me to nail that particular person, because they want that person to get roasted. Well, I see somebody said, what's the best way to handle a heckler? Don't run from them. Don't run from them, but don't let them have the final word.
Yeah.
I've seen comics that'll say, well, do you think you could do a better job? Why don't you come up here and do it? And I've actually seen where the heckler walked up on stage and was funnier than the comic. And that's just that's the door, that's the Pandora's box that you're opening at that particular point. It's your stage. That stage belongs to you, and everybody in that place has paid good money to see you perform.
Definitely.
So the last thing they want is somebody else ruining the show, especially if it's a drunk heckler. If it's a heckler that they're known for that, that's what they go to a show to do, then they're going for you to actually engage back with them, because they want to have that conversation. They want you to talk to them.
Sure.
And I have no problem with that. I can talk to people all day long. That's what I do for a living. outside of doing stand-up comedies. I just talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And, I talk to people taking vacations. That's what I do. So I can talk to anybody about anything all day long. But you have to kind of shut it down a little bit at some point because you don't want to get too sidetracked. You have to, kind of be like, okay, and then just move on from there. And, is the club should have your back too. If they get really belligerent or vile or whatever, then the club should be able to handle that before it gets to be an issue. I've only ever seen one fight break out from a heckler and a comedian on stage. And that was I was backstage. I was waiting to actually go on. I was the headliner, and I was backstage, and this comic on stage. We were in Alabama, I think. And this comic on stage got into an argument with a guy at the table because the guy at the table was being a little loud.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just kind of looked at me and said, "Hey, George Jefferson," is the way the guy's hair was cut. He goes, "You mind lowering your table conversation so I can tell my jokes up here?" The guy's daughter said something to him. He said something to the daughter. The guy came up and started rushing the stage. And then the next thing I know, the police were called, and there was a full-on brawl
Mm-hmm.
in the comedy club. So I assumed
Mm-hmm.
I was no longer needed for the night. So I packed up my stuff. You know what I mean? I'm just starting. I'm like, okay, well, I guess since the cops are emptying the place out, I'm not going to be asked to perform. So I'm packing up my stuff. The owner of the club comes back and he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to drive home now." And he says, "Oh, no. We've still got 3 or 4 people out there. I need you to." I'm like, I had to go and perform an hour for 4 people, and one of them was the guy that got into a fight with a comedian on stage.
Wow. That is great. Wow.
Oh, okay. Well,
If I can take a heckler question real quick,
yeah.
to me, real quickly, because I love this question.
No, that's what
my best prevention is the best cure. So I'm trying to make sure that what I'm doing is heckler proof as possible. And the idea behind that again is setting up so that the audience is going to be with me and is going to be against anyone who's interrupting what I'm trying to do. And there's definitely a lot of thought and theory about that, but that's the basic idea. And then secondly, is recognizing that heckling is a scale and not a binary. Meaning that, like, if there's people who will just be into the show who are talking, but they're into the show. They think the show is great, and they're just loud laughers or loud talkers. And you should address those people much differently than someone who is actively saying like negative, awful things during the middle of your show. So you have to figure out what that scale is and then approach each situation on its own, and not as if the guy is like, "Oh man, you're so funny," and he's loud or whatever, you're like, "Thanks, man, appreciate it. All right, let's let everybody else enjoy yourselves. There's no reason to put that guy down. That's all. You just let him say his thing and then move on. And then you can't approach that with the version of I remember my first beer. Not every line, everything should be those standard heckler lines. Like, do I come to your mom's job and bounce on the bed? All that stuff should not. You don't have to use those lines. You should be dealing with the situation in the situation that is in, based on the severity of the situation. There you go. Yeah, that's my opinion about that.
Definitely. All right. Well, we're coming up on just about an hour time, and I just want to thank you both for being in here with us. We really appreciate it. We hope to see both at Dragon Con this year. In the meantime, where can we find you guys? John, how about you?
Take a Disney cruise on the Disney Fantasy between now and forever, it seems. I'm on Disney cruises for a while. I'm also if you're in Texas, I'm going to be at a place called the Magic Agency Theater, which is a theater right across the street from the Alamo in San Antonio. I'll be there the first weekend in June. And there's a couple other miscellaneous gigs I have, though, but mostly I do my shows with Disney right now and then private events. I would like to also mention again the workshops that we are doing for Dragon Con. They're super a lot of fun. And then also me and that same magician Kurt Anderson will be doing our shows on the Saturday of Dragon Con. Please come to the show. It's super, super fun. And we have a lot of really interesting random magic-y acts that do stuff. So it's a great Saturday night thing to do at Dragon Con while you're there. So, and my website is cardjon, cardjon.com, cardjon.com. You can find out about any sort of other dates I have coming up there.
Definitely.
So
How about you,
I'm
Steve?
I'm currently doing a redesign on my personal website. So right now I'm just using the social media platform with Instagram and Twitter. PTS Comic are my handles on both of those. Facebook, you can find me there as well. But basically, I'm putting together a new tour schedule coming up for 2024. So I'm really excited about doing that and getting back out on the road and starting to hit the dusty trail once again. You can find me at DragonCon. I would really encourage you, if you're coming to DragonCon this year, come find me. I'll be working both the main track and I'll be working Apocalypse Rising in various capacities. I host the Zombie Prom on Friday nights.
Oh, wow.
I also will be doing a Pirate Sea Shanty sing-along Saturday night at 10 p.m. over at Sheridan.
Awesome.
And we'll have a great time doing that. We had a line out the door. So this year they're giving us one of the bigger venues to do that in. So
Great.
please come and see us and have a great time with us at DragonCon this year.
For sure. Well, that all sounds great, and I'm gonna for sure try to check you guys out at Dragon Con. In the meantime, if you're watching us on the YouTube, please make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below and let us know how you're doing. You can, of course, always find us on Facebook. Our Facebook group is Dragon Con Theater and Performing Arts Lovers Unofficial. As we've said before, we are not an official part of Dragon Con yet. We have hopes. Until then, we'll facilitate more of these kind of panels. And anyway, the curtain is closing on that.